Hello, and welcome to the Metta Hour podcast with Sharon Salzberg. I'm Lily Cushman. I produce this podcast, and today we're coming to you with episode 252, a conversation with author, coach, podcaster, and influencer, Cory Allen. This is Cory's first time on the Metta Hour, though Sharon has been in conversation with him before on his podcast, but we're happy to have him here talking about his new book, Brave New You, which came out in June of 2024 from Hay House. A lot of this conversation is talking about Brave New You, Cory's new book. He also shares his origin story and how we can open to greater possibility, how we can cultivate greater agency through rewriting our own stories, through language, and the importance of self-trust and faith, and the way that we have to challenge ourselves in a growth process. If you don't know Cory, he's really blown up on social the past year or so, writing daily thoughts on mindfulness and mental clarity. His podcast, And Then It Hit Me, has over 300 episodes and a lot of great interviews. And once you hear Cory's voice, you'll understand why he's one of those people that has to have a podcast, because he has an incredible voice. So get your headphones. And he closes out this conversation with a guided meditation. So it's great to have him here. And before we get to the conversation, a couple quick announcements. Sharon has some virtual events coming up in December. The weekend of December 6th, she's joining forces with the Holistic Life Foundation for a caregivers retreat hosted by Garrison Institute. And also December 15th, she'll be teaching with Frank Ostazeski, hosted by the Upaya Zen Center. So you can head over to SharonSalzberg.com to find out about those and all the other upcoming events headed your way. Okay, so let's get into episode 253 with Cory Allen and Sharon Salzberg. Hello, Cory, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Sharon. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be with you today.
It's great. Where are you? How are you?
I'm in my body on Earth. Mostly, I guess. I'm in Austin, Texas, and I'm doing well. I'm just, I'm feeling really present and grateful and very unweighted by things right now.
Nice. So it is really great to reconnect. It's been a while since I was on your podcast, I think 2021 or so, and I feel like a lot has been happening for you since then. And you've just released your second book in June of 2024, which is called Brave New You. And you've really exploded on social media since we last talked. So how has all this growth been for you?
It's been fun. I mean, everything, I joke about being like the Jane Goodall of my own mind. I'm just always kind of like, there's a Cory's consciousness is experiencing reality. I'm taking notes. And this has all been a great bit of material in terms of that. It's been interesting watching everything expand and reaching more people. It's been interesting watching how my mind has responded to it, watching how, reality is a co-creation. Whenever we look out into the world, however it's responding to us, we have to then respond to the echo of that. And so I suppose to simplify that, whenever what's coming at you in life starts to change, it's interesting because you have no choice but to change. And that change often comes in terms of your priorities, how you think of yourself, how you think of the world, how you think of what you're doing in the moment. And so it's all been very interesting to observe how I've been responding to all of that change and the growth and the visibility. And I've been grateful, I think, just for I think being old enough to where, I'm 42, so it's not like I'm not impressed with myself or what's happened or anything. I'm too old for that. I've just felt really appreciative, and I think it's done nothing but made it to where I felt just a greater sense of gratitude and focus and sincerity, I think, with everything I've been doing.
It's great. 42 is very young compared to some people, not mentioning who. So I've been hosting a series of fireside chats recently, talking with longtime Dharma teachers about different moments in their own path, and find it really interesting to hear what the initial spark was that drew them to spiritual practice. And of course, back in the 60s or the 70s when I started, like I went to India in 1970, it was a whole different landscape. There was no wellness industry. There was no mindful mayo. There was no meditation Barbies, although I will confess, I now do have a meditation Barbie. I actually do. I purchased one. I couldn't resist. But, for somebody like me, it was so different a cosmology, a worldview, and something drew me to Eastern practices. And that was largely, a profound sense of personal suffering. And you kind of needed like a strong, strong intention of some kind, because the perspective, the teachings, the values weren't so much less accessible. So I'd love to hear your meditation origin story. I know you've had a regular practice for over 20 years now. And so how did that begin for you?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking. And I just love your background on this, because whenever I tell the story that I'm about to tell, it's interesting because generally I'm saying okay, so in the 90s, there weren't there weren't Google, there was no YouTube, there weren't here's how to meditate for business, excellence or whatever.
That's right.
It was a whole different thing. So I love talking with you about this. I'm excited. You really, of course, hit the nail right on the head. I think that any of us that come to being interested in Eastern wisdom traditions, it's all out of necessity. I think I've never met anyone that had a perfectly happy and grounded and suffering-free life and said, hey, I think I'm going to go really immerse myself in all this stuff. I think, people are, as you said, drawn to it because they need it. And, or they're looking for something and it looks like what they might be looking for, I should say. So that was very much my case, and it was all accidental, or if you want to say it was, programmed by the reality simulator people, or it was divine, or however you want to frame it. Essentially in my background, there was a lot of just emotional abuse and narcissism and manipulation and a lot of just a really turbulent environment. In the ecosystem I was in, no one was a reader. There was no books around. Maybe there was a National Enquirer laying around just to give you a tone of, there weren't any, there were no books. There was no Eastern thought. There was nothing like that. And in fact, those things would have been a reason to become angry. They would have been punishable, probably, offenses, because they fell outside of what I like to call the safety Christian paradigm. Someone who claims to be Christian but doesn't do anything other than use it as a tool for threats generally. And so in this environment, in feeling very isolated in that environment, I quite randomly heard someone, whenever I was a teenager, say, if they could have dinner with two people, who would it be? And this is out in public, totally random people. And this person said, oh, Jesus and Nietzsche. And I remember, just hearing that name and thinking, oh, that sounds like the edge of a knife. That sounds cool. That sounds interesting. Stuck in my mind. And then sometime later, I was just walking through a bookstore and I saw that name on the back of a book. And I thought, oh, there's that name. It looks cool. It looks sharp. Feels dangerous. I'm interested. And I had a real issue with authority too at the time. I mean, I still do, honestly. But, so it was a perfect fit. And, that all comes from this, whenever you're in a situation where you're experiencing trauma, generally, of course, what happens if you have conditional love and that type of emotional abuse, it makes you hyper independent. It makes you to where you have to, you realize either consciously or subconsciously that you're going to have to be the one to fend for yourself and for a stable sense of reality. And so therefore you become very self-reliant. And in that self-reliance, I think what generally happens is what happened to me is you then begin to trust systems and authorities less because the preeminent one has failed you. And so you become skeptical of them. And so that's what certainly happened to me. And so seeing this name, I thought, oh, that's cool. And I went over, pulled out the book, opened it up, started looking through it. And it really struck me as it was like, oh, wow, this is how I think. And it's not necessarily what I thought, but just the abstract math of taking these big concepts, boiling them down into these little sticks of dynamite that created insights. That was really, it resonated so much with me. It made me feel very like seen and at home in this weird way where I thought, wow, there's other people that have existed that process reality like this. And so I became obsessed with Western philosophy. And part of it is just being immensely curious. Like I'm relentlessly curious as a human being. I think also looking back at it, I realized it was a type of emotional avoidance. It was, let's block out the outside world and go deep into the mind and into this other world of ideas as this safe place. After spending an obsessive amount of time, I would read for hours and hours a day. I then just gradually started to take note that there was also an Eastern thought section in the bookstore. And as I said a moment ago, this is in the 90s, and it was like I would go to used bookstores and various places like that, and I just find these used books. And I'm a huge music person as well. Like the first part of my career was being a composer and a record producer. And so there's something about like looking for used, like through used vinyl. And I feel like used books are the same way, is that you just go to the section, you flip through them, and one of them will just have a little magic dust floating off of it. There's something about the look, the feel, something about it. It just is like this little node in reality that's blinking at you, being like, hello, this is the one. This has something in there. And I really treated the Eastern thought section like that. So anyway, the first book I recall, and again, I love talking to you about this because it'll actually land with you. I went over and just randomly looked at, all right, well, I need to start somewhere with Eastern thought. And I picked up Essays in Zen Buddhism by D.T. Suzuki. And I started reading that, and I thought, wow, this is how I think, and it's what I think, in the sense that the philosophy and the ideas in there are driving towards a relieving of suffering and an intention of peace and skillful wholesomeness. And underneath my frustration and my sadness and my feelings of, I think, betrayal by, kind of perennial betrayal, underneath all of that were those feelings of like, no, this is how we should be in life. And it really just connected all of the parts of myself for me. And I switched my obsession over to Eastern wisdom traditions from then. Yeah. Because, okay, this is the full picture. And so then I just started meditating. I've never had a teacher. I just started reading as many books and all the schools I could. I started reading commentaries in the Pali Canon and just everything I could get my hands on. And I just turned it all into the laboratory that I will read what this says. I will play with it and experiment with it, see how it makes me feel, see how the texture of my mind changes. And if it's useful, I will add it to my toolbox. If it isn't, I'll leave it behind and maybe I'll revisit it again later. And that was how it all began. And the first real meditation series that I started working with was just like totally basic, which certainly doesn't mean it's not effective. And sometimes, of course, that's the most effective. And what I would do is I would go and I would lay in my bed and I would take deep breaths and exhale and try and release the muscles in my body as much as I could. And I would just make it a little game where I thought, let's see how deeply I can relax all of the muscles. And now that the big muscles are relaxed, let's do a body scan and look towards the finer and finer parts of the body and just see if I can do that until I feel like I'm floating. And I would do that, and it became really transformative. And what happened was like that I realized like a decade or two later that what I was doing, these three things that happened that were really important, and I just lucked into them. One was that I was practicing PMR, like progressive muscle relaxation, which a therapist would use to help somebody overcome trauma. Two, I was sending signals from my body to my mind that my environment was safe through those long, slow breaths. So I was switching over out of that fight or flight mode into the parasympathetic nervous system mode, getting a little bit of spaciousness in the mind, getting a little bit of pause and some, the mindfulness gap in between my reactionary sense of safety and self-protection and how I could intentionally respond to life in the world. And then three, that created the change in which I started to be able to observe. I started to see that the more I did that, the more that my perspective on what life looked like changed. And I began to measure that and notice that the more I practiced that, the more that reality and the world looked different. And therefore, the more I could change how I interacted with it. And I just realized that, okay, this will just keep happening the more I do this. And the more that means that's the more intention I can have in life, the more peace I can bring for myself and for those around me, the more clarity I can have. And honestly, I just never stopped pursuing that.
Something that I hear in your story really expresses those moments in our lives when we can open to a greater possibility and our minds open and we see like a much bigger view of life or of ourselves. And that brings me to your book, because you break down how to create the conditions for those kinds of moments to more naturally arise in us. It's like the actual subtitle of the book too, Brave New You, a roadmap to believing that more is possible.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most exciting things. If we look at the patterns that we live in, it's not what is like quote unquote normal. It's just what's happened. And I think most of us that we just live our lives in this way where we're kind of on autopilot. We're trying to figure out what's going on. We're trying to figure out who we are. We're trying to figure out how to feel some sense of safety and direction. We're trying to enjoy ourselves. And in that time, it's all this automatic behavior that we're just getting used to these patterns that we're living in. And then because it happens so gradually, whenever we do begin to get this sense of self-awareness, then we look at our lives and we go, okay, well, this is what is then. All these patterns of living and thinking and being, this is just what is. This is how life is. And I think being able to disrupt that, and that's really what I'm trying to do in this book, I want to disrupt that for a person and have them use a sense of mindful awareness to go, oh, wait a second, there's so much more available. And my sense of myself in the world it doesn't have to be limited by my thinking patterns. And by liberating myself from being stuck in certain ways of thinking, shifting my mindset, I can then start to identify the areas of my life where I'm not happy, or that I wish were different. I can pursue those, and through the minor changes of those things, I can then prove to myself that I have the skill and the capability to recognize something I want to be different, to take consistent small steps to change that. And then through creating that small change, it builds the self-trust to where you can then do that again and again and again. And the final part of it is then once you start building that self-trust in that deep way, you then begin to be able to do something really beautiful using those mindfulness tools is along with it. And that is actually listen to what feels right to you in any given moment.
So agency feels like a good way to frame what you're describing. And here's a quote from you. Each day when we wake up, we are reborn and get a fresh chance to be more of who we want to be. So that's just lovely. And, I would say from my own work that one of our biggest hindrances to being happy in this life is how we feel about ourselves, how we value ourselves, or what we think is possible and not possible for us. And you speak to this a lot in your book, and I wonder if you could say some more about it.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, for whatever reason, we all are so hard on ourselves. And we think that the rest of the world is thinking about us the way that we're thinking about us. And that's just not true. Because one, just from a technical point of view, people, you can only know like 0.5% of what's going on inside of another person. But the best we can do is use this clunky language and some really kind of basic animal facial recognition skills to get a sense of who someone is and what's going on with them. But the vast ocean of what's actually happening inside of each of us is so rich. And we forget that other people don't have access to that. So all of the memories and all of the self-limiting thoughts and self-defeating thoughts that we have, it creates this momentum of emotional sense of self. And we assume that the rest of the world shares that idea with us. So that makes us move into life feeling sheepish and not confident and kind of down on ourselves in some way. And I think being able to just really reframe that and understand that we aren't the least parts of how we think of ourselves, that we're a full spectrum human. And the more that we can remember that, the more that we can take action and really disrupt all of that by recognizing that, something I lay out in the book, and that is realizing that our thoughts aren't facts. Of course, they're just suggestions. It's just mental formations. But in fact, our thoughts do affect how we feel. And then how we feel influences how we act. And how we act actually determines who we are in the world. And that's what other people can see. And that's what's really real. And so recognizing that system of thoughts moving into feeling, feeling moving into action, action feeling into or moving into who we are is really powerful because it lets us, release these negative images of self and then actually express ourselves in the fullness of who we really want to be in life.
So this feels connected to another area that I find really interesting, and that's the world of story or narrative. And I've written in different times in different books about the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves and the stories others tell about us that we somehow absorb or start to inhabit. And I'd love to get your take on this. What role do narratives play in our ability to be happy or successful?
Oh yeah, I mean it's pretty much everything. I mean, the stories, the narratives that we're believing, I mean, it pretty much just affects everything. And I think that's why, at the beginning of the book, I move into what I call a little bit of mental house cleaning. And that's just laying out these mindfulness tools, essentially, to be able to recognize a lot of the common thoughts that create those stories that cause suffering, that cause limitations, and what we think is, what we're capable of and what we can do in life. And just breaking and exposing that story for what it is again and again and again is really powerful, because that turns into a thinking habit that actually helps us. Whenever we recognize that we're starting to think, I don't know about this, I don't know if I can do this, or who am I to want to do this, or I'm a terrible person, I suck, whatever. You use the suffering, the ping of that as the alarm bell to go, wait, hold on a second. Where are the facts here? How can I prove that this isn't real? What I'm thinking, this is just this narrative that's being created in my mind. And by recognizing the narrative for what it is, it exposes it to outside air. And, and that outside air is just some objectivity. And whenever you see that, that then breaks the hold, or really, it's like a form of hypnotism, because it really is, story. It seduces us into different views of reality. That's why, movies and fiction books are so powerful. It's sucking us into this world the whole time, which we have a real emotional reaction to. It's kind of a good example. It's like if you're in the movie theater and you're watching a horror movie and something scary happens on the screen and you jump, it's like, that there's not really a threat there. You know that you're watching a movie, but your body still reacts to it anyway. And that's just what's happening inside of our own heads the whole time, is that we think, oh, I'm this terrible person. And then you react to it. But really, it's just a movie. So recognizing that something's just happening on the screen, or in other words, in your mind, is really liberating, because you can just break that, reset, and then proceed in life with a sense of present, open clarity, as opposed to assumption.
And one of the things I've really liked in your work, in your books, was the invitation to rewrite our stories as many times as we want to, which speaks to my great love of beginning again. So here's a quote from your book: "People get used to the idea of who they are." Sounds so tedious, doesn't
it? It certainly can be. Yeah, it sure can be. And thank you so much for that. Yeah, we get just like, we get into this groove of who we are, because there's something that I like to call like the sitcom reality, where we have our life script, we have the people in our life system, people in our jobs, our family, our friends, and they get this certain expectation about us. And so that's, again, back to this kind of reality being co-created thing, is like, we're playing our role. We think, oh, I have to be Cory. I need to go be this calm, sort of somewhat rascally, also, wise person in the world for whatever reason, because that's what someone would expect of me. And I like playing that role, because I think it's a good role to play, but we think about like, okay, this is who I have to be. And then the people that I know expect me to be that person. And if I showed up and I was different, it would be it could feel very confusing to other people. And so, people in their lives, they get used to this notion of like, I have to be this person. I have to do these things. I have to check these boxes. And the fear is that if they do something different, what will happen is that whenever they show up and they act differently, or they think differently, or they look differently, that then they're going to upset the other actors on set, because everyone's going to go, hey, you're going off script here. What are you doing? Now my lines don't work either. This isn't good. And everyone gets weird, So recognizing that ultimately all it is that the fact that we're in this kind of habituated system of how we think about ourselves and how we expect other people expect us to be. But the reality is that, we're also adaptable, and we don't have to stay locked into this version of ourselves just because of what makes other people comfortable. So for example, if you show up and you're wearing a weird hat or something, and you like it, you want to be a person that can wear the weird hat, but you fear that your friends might comment on it and it'll make you self-conscious. What's really going to happen is that you'll show up with it once and someone might go, "Oh, new hat," and you'll go, "Yeah, new hat," and they'll be, "Huh, okay." And then the next time you show up with it, no one will say anything because they'll go, "Oh, they're wearing the hat again. All right, I guess that's what they like now," or something. It's just, that's the same thing as like if if you're someone that is I don't know, like partying really hard and that's how you hung out with your friends, you show up and you say like, "Oh, I'm not gonna have any, I'm just gonna have water tonight, like no cocktails, but I still want to hang out," and they'll go, "Oh, that's weird," and then the next time they'll be like, "Yeah, that's what they're doing," it's so yes, this notion of that's in terms of a social system, but just in yourself, if you're like, "Oh, I have to be a person that works in an office, I have to be a person that takes care of others and doesn't allow myself to be provided for, I have to be," the list goes on and on and on. You just can recognize those things, whatever it is that feels like you want to change, that will make you happier, that will bring who you are today into the present as opposed to who you were in the past into the present. And you can make those changes. And I think it's something, as I put in the book, that we should all constantly be doing, because nature and life and society and everything is always changing. So I think really we need to change and redefine ourselves to stay, I think, refreshed along with the cutting edge of everything that's happening now.
You do have a whole section of the book on self-care and the importance of loving oneself. And I have this wonderful colleague, George Mumford, who's like a mindfulness whisperer for top-tier athletes like Kobe Bryant and Michael Jordan had been his students. And George would go into these really high-level organizations and would teach. And I used to ask him, this was, many years ago, I asked him, "Are you using the word mindfulness these days?" And he said, "Well, now I can, because there's research and science and things that are, kind of the language of Western culture." And then I said, "And what do you say about love and compassion?" Because I knew he must be teaching the values or the qualities, but the words are awfully weird sometimes. And so he was quiet for a while and he said, "What I say instead is, don't be hating. Don't be hating on yourself. Don't be hating on others." So I'm curious, with the variety of different people that you work with, like in your one-on-one coaching, how you approach kind of the use of language and how you express these values.
Oh, I love this question, and I love the topic, because it's something I think about a lot. The of course, the language that we use to talk about things, especially things that might penetrate the armor or conditioned self of someone that make them feel vulnerable. Man, that's you have to be careful, and each word you use, of course, will have a lot of weight to it in a lot of cases. So even for myself, like whenever I hear, I'll just say some of my words that make me go like, whenever I hear the word, even like self-love, even the word healing, any of these things make me a little, I still feel the twinge of just sort of discomfort, and it feels a little, someone put too many sweet and lows in the iced tea, That's the most Texas I'll ever sound, by the way. So, I try and be conscious of that. And I remember how some of those things make me feel. And I remember, okay, so now the things that I'm comfortable with might be the things that make another person feel the way I feel whenever I say that. And so I try and be really conscious, and ultimately, after thinking about this for years, what I do the most is just strip away as many of the buzzwords as possible and put everything in plain language. So that, to me, that's just kind of a way we can talk about the concepts without having to battle someone's association that they've made with the words. Because sometimes, no matter how far away someone gets from the association, you can never truly be free from it. Even if someone is being patient with it. So honestly, that's a way that I think I had a lot of success on social media. It's because I did exactly what you're talking about. Is I was looking at this and I thought, the buzzwords and stuff, it trends. They all go through cycles, they go through trends, and people have their preconceived ideas of what certain things mean. And I mean, speaking with you, you like some of the concepts, even something like letting go, the concepts from Eastern, thought that get poorly translated a lot of times into Western ideas and then get turned into like these memes, these healing memes. They're not even talking about the same thing. You know what I mean? But it becomes like this, it has high social currency, and it's really, that's a whole different conversation. So to avoid that, I think let's just remove all of the buzzwords and try and get to the concepts in as simple and concise language as possible. And to me, that's the way I think it's the most successful. So you can actually get to what, the words don't matter. What matters is getting to the point and the idea and conveying that. So that's how I approach that. How do you think about that in these days?
Well, I think very much the same. And as I look back at, especially writing, the things I've written, I think one of my goals, even if I hadn't been conscious of it, was to somehow try to redeem certain words like love, and loving kindness and compassion, which can often seem like weakness or giving in or being kind of stupid or saccharine. And maybe especially, and this was the next thing I wanted to ask you about, the word faith, because I wrote a book called Faith. And when I would tell people I'm writing a book on faith, they would say to me, why? Like, because so many people had a bad association or a really terrible experience sometimes with, systems that would not allow them to question. And that was called faith, or efforts to silence them in some way. And that was called faith, or adherence to a doctrine. I was defining the word faith, of course, very, very differently than that. And not in a religious connotation or having to do with, believing something uncritically, but really more as trusting our own deepest experience. And there's a lot in your book about self-trust. And so I wonder if you could talk about that.
Yeah, certainly. And that's reclaiming the word faith is a powerful thing to do. It's beautiful that you took that on in that way. I think self-trust is it's so important, because ultimately at the end of the day, how we're going to be happy is if we listen to what's arising that feels good, that feels right, that is the way that we're being drawn instead of the way that we're trying to force ourselves. The more that we can feel that, and I really break it down into examples in the book too, is it's like, what's the thing you do that gives you this little blast of like life force, for lack of a better term? What just gives you that energy and makes you feel excited and almost that kind of youthful zest that you only get there? Like, what is it? Okay, now you know what that is? Do that more. Whatever that thing. And it doesn't matter. It could be cooking, it could be gardening, it could be, teaching, it can be writing, whatever it is, running, pick your thing. It doesn't even matter what it is. And in the book, I say, in fact, it probably shouldn't be something lofty. You should go. And also, please don't consider if it's cool. Who doesn't matter if someone else thinks about it. It doesn't matter. If it makes you feel more alive, then do that more. Because the only way that we're going to be able to build meaning, to feel fulfilled, and to ultimately feel happy is by spending more time doing the things that to us make us feel good and make us, feel that extra life force moving through us. And that takes the self-trust. It takes being able to quiet the mind, move out all of the negative thinking habits, get all of the noise and the weird version of ourselves that we're trying to negotiate against all the time, get that person out of the way so that we can actually have some spaciousness and have the clarity to feel whenever something comes in and arises that makes us feel that way, and then be able to prioritize it and listen to it and move into that direction.
one of the ways I was defining faith, which really came out of the Buddhist tradition, which is to offer our hearts to something. And that is really relying on knowing, first of all, you have a heart, and also knowing that that offering is a great gift, that's not a small thing to offer our hearts to something, and it needs to be accompanied by a lot of examination and discernment and all kinds of other things, and because it is such a great gift.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. How would you think that you do that recently?
Have I done that recently?
Yeah, how do you do that now?
I think it's largely by allowing myself to experiment or be different. I've been doing the same thing for a lot of years.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a little bit like when I first tried to write a book. My first book was Loving Kindness, which came out in 1995, I think. And it was unimaginable to me, really, that I could write. But for whatever reason, I was impelled to try and not to just, fall into the voice, which was very prevalent of like, you can't do this. What are you kidding? And also, I didn't have a computer. Almost nobody I knew had their own computer in those days, back in those days, before a lot of listeners were born. And the idea of being able to use a computer was way beyond me. And the story that I told, which is even more maybe relevant as I've gotten so much older, was I was here in Barrie, Mass, where the Insight Meditation Society is, and we had a visit one day from a 94-year-old monk, and he mentioned he was learning how to use a computer. And I thought, okay, he's 94 years old, and he's learning how to use a computer. Maybe I can too. So, and I am so much older now, and so it's an interesting question, like what's falling away because it's not reasonable anymore. Like I'm not going to start journalism school, in fact,
Mm-hmm.
And what's falling away just because I think, I'm too old to try. And I need to challenge that kind of feeling. Maybe it'll be like learning how to use a computer.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's really that story about the monk. That's it. That's the ticket right there. Mm-hmm. That's the whole thing. It is being present and having an original mind enough in which you can see reality without the assumption of, in his case, like, why he might go, well, I'm too old, or like, what's the point? Mm-hmm. What am I going to use it for 6 months? He's like, he's like, wow, look at what this thing can do. Let's move into that and experience that right now. And that's really, that's it. That's most of the teaching, and for me.
Yeah. No, that's great. So you also talk a lot about intuition in your book, which, may not be a word that you always hear in spiritual traditions. So why does that feel important to you for people to have a relationship with?
Yeah, I kind of, it's one of those words that I sort of am real skeptical of, and I like to use precisely. I tried to use it precisely. I wanted to, honestly, it looked like another entryway into a reader's mind to get them to find that place deep within themselves that's speaking to them. So we can talk about it in self-trust. We can talk about, so that's kind of an intellectual version of this, and intuition is an emotive version of this, the feeling of that. And so I tried to weave those two things together so that a reader or a variety of different readers it will click with them to listen to the feeling in their body. And I believe in there, I say, it doesn't mean that it's not always going to be right. Like your intuition, what feels right to you, what you're thinking, that it's not some indicator of truth and reality, but what it is your most intimate guide that you have. And just knowing like, this is the thing I got to follow. And I know it's not always going to be right, but this is what I got. So let's go with that and continue with that openness. Like the monk, let's continue following it and stay open and understand that, things will change and evolve and shift and what have you, but that listening to your deeper self is really crucial as much as possible.
So great. So to close out our conversation, I'm hoping you'll lead us in a practice of some kind of reflection or meditation.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you. So, all right, I'm just going to go for a couple minutes here. And what I'm going to do is, since I mentioned at the top of our conversation, this practice I did whenever I was a kid, I'm just going to take us through a few minutes of that because I feel like it's a beautiful enzo of a way to make this conversation 360 degrees. So I would invite everyone that's listening to, if possible, close your eyes and just begin to move your neck and shoulders around a little bit. Perhaps stretch your shoulder blades down your back, move your chest out. Begin feeling a spaciousness in your body. And allow your breath to just gently flow in through your nose, through your mouth. Whenever it moves into your body, you just feel the true essence of life, of presence, of safety, flowing all throughout your body, down your legs, down your arms. And you feel the tips of your toes, the ends of your fingers, all the way through your entire self. Feeling a sense of calm and safety, and also a sense of clarity. And then you take another gentle, stable breath in, not forcing it, just allowing it to naturally flow in. Then when you're ready, exhale and just allow the breath to fall. Allow the chest to fall, everything to flow out of you peacefully. The body is designed to exhale on its own. So all you have to do is release and let go. And allow the breath to leave you. You take another breath in. Gently feel filled with the sense of peacefulness once again. And now when you exhale, relax all the muscles in your face, your shoulders, your arms and legs. Feel fluid. Feel almost like you're made out of this liquid gold. Now, after taking another breath in, there's no need to tense your body at all. And breathe in gently and automatically. And when you exhale, allow your muscles in your body to get softer and softer, letting go more and more until you feel yourself peacefully held in the infinite cradle of now. Thank you, Sharon.
Wow, thank you so much. It's really lovely to be with you all together, and it was a beautiful meditation.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations again on your new book, Brave New You, which is now available in hardcover, audiobook, and ebook formats in all the places books are sold.
Thank you so much, Sharon. I really appreciate you having me on your podcast and spending this time with you. And also just all of the life of work that you've done is so beautiful. And I know you probably don't want to hear it, but it really is. It's a beautiful, the ripples that you send out over your life and work are immeasurable and will continue on forever. And just thank you on behalf of everyone that's been touched by that.
Well, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Hey folks, thanks so much for listening. If you'd like to learn more about Cory's work or get yourself a copy of his new book, Brave New You, you can head over to his website, Cory-Allen.com. That's Cory-Allen.com. And for all things Sharon, including online courses, guided meditations, or her 13 different books, you can head over to SharonSalzberg.com. This has been the Metta Hour podcast, brought to you by the Be Here Now Network. May you be safe, may you be happy, may you be healthy, and may you live with ease.